Today, men and women throughout the world are fighting a battle on 1,000 fronts. It's the only battle which unites the whole race of man, a battle against suffering, privation, and sudden disaster. In peace, no less than in war, it has to be fought by those who can fight it for those who cannot. Its noblest weapon is nature's own. It is that instinct which makes a family stick together, a tribe, a nation, the knowledge that we are all kin. We've all seen an accident, some of us across our own street. Do we close the curtains on it? Do we go out to look or stand by, perhaps unable and therefore afraid to help? Isn't it the job of the ambulance? In war, we use our emergency dressings to help the wounded. We learn the rudiments of first aid as a necessity. Yet the road alone exacts as ghastly a toll as many a war. When it's brought before our eyes, many of us wish to turn our faces from it. These youngsters do not. They've sacrificed their leisure to train in first aid. They've given up weekend dates to man roadside emergency aid posts. They've spent their money to supply their own cars and motorbikes for patrol and rescue work, even their own petrol. Unlike the world of onlookers, they're geared for emergency, for proper on-the-spot help until the ambulance arrives. They're young members of the Red Cross operating from an aid post on a bypass. They started in the Junior Red Cross, which has 50,000 members in this country and 30 million throughout the world, banded together under one emblem, devoted in one way or another to bringing help to others. Not only on the roads, but wherever big crowds gather, the volunteers are there too. To the Farnborough Air Show, for example, they come with a fleet of ambulances, mobile first aid units equipped with radio, a dozen first aid tents linked by telephone with surrounding hospitals, and more than 600 trained nurses and helpers working on rota to take up stations where the crowd is thickest. Compared with the excitement overhead, their work may not be spectacular. Apart from the rare tragedy of an aerial disaster, it's concerned with the welfare of the crowd, with collapses and heart attack cases, cuts and broken limbs, right down to a sprained ankle. The job is essential. These helpers treat up to 1,000 casualties at Farnborough alone, and in 1 year, they man 6,000 such first aid posts at airports, beaches, athletic meetings, factories, hop fields, cinemas, and other public entertainments. At some of the big race meetings, trained Red Cross volunteers working under a team of doctors run complete hospitals for the public. And except for the odd glimpse one might catch of an ambulance, a first aid tent, or a stretcher moving through the crowd, their presence there is hardly noticed among the thousands who come to share the great communal thrill of the National, the Derby, or the excitement of cup football. To many a casualty in such crowds, the sight of sudden organized help materializing from nowhere is as surprising as if it had risen out of the ground. And they ask, many of them, "You do this for nothing?" With its headquarters in the heart of London, the British Red Cross Society is the centre of a massive organisation dealing with every kind of human welfare, from disaster relief to providing a language service for foreign patients in British hospitals. It brings clinics to remote mountain villages and helps to reunite families separated through war or civil disturbance. It assists in clinics, hospitals, convalescent homes, in infant and child welfare, in schools, in the care of the handicapped, the lonely, and the aged. The Red Cross was born in Geneva 100 years ago, thanks to the crusading of a Swiss civilian, Henri Dunant, who had seen the carnage and suffering of a battle in which 40,000 soldiers were left on the field to die. Today, Geneva is the center of the International Red Cross, and under its symbol, more than 90 countries are united in a common work of mercy covering the entire earth, wherever there is human distress. Its membership is now more than 157 million. Britain is a founder member of this great partnership, organizing care and relief not only for the needy among its own people, but helping throughout the world wherever disaster strikes or famine and disease rage, as in the Congo. Through these offices, in response to appeals, come hundreds of thousands of pounds from the people of Britain in cheques, notes, and postal orders. After the earthquakes which destroyed whole towns in Persia, the British Red Cross appeals brought nearly £500,000 tumbling out onto these desks to be converted into blankets, rebuilding materials, medicines, food and clothing. Our own needs at home are different, but they're many. This Red Cross depot, for instance, supplies invalid aids on loan, a whole range of sick room equipment. It administers no fewer than 1,500 of these medical loan depots. After World War I, it was the Red Cross which pioneered Britain's first system of voluntary blood donors, which eventually grew into the National Blood Transfusion Service, now state-administered. But hospitals still need freshly drawn blood for special cases, and in the Greater London area, the Red Cross still supplies it through its own register of donors. People like this garage hand. He's prepared to answer an emergency call at a moment's notice, knowing that a life may depend on the fresh blood he can give. Among this band of special volunteer donors, one man alone has given no fewer than 129 donations. Another, a woman, has given 99. The organisation of the British Red Cross Society is a vast and complex one, catering for needs that are unknown and unimaginable to many of us. It reaches to 43 branches in British territories overseas. When the typhoon struck Hong Kong and rendered thousands of Chinese destitute, the British rallied to yet another appeal for donations. Blankets, clothing and relief supplies of all kinds were rushed by air to the Far East. The essence of relief work is always utmost speed. The typhoon savaged Hong Kong with a fury that beached great ships. It flattened entire towns. For many families, huddled in what was once a crowded settlement, it blew away every humble possession except the rags they wore. In any small country hit by disasters of this magnitude, local charities can muster only a fraction of the resources to cope with the stricken and the homeless. They need help, immediate and massive, from outside. And between the international headquarters of Geneva and the nations of the Red Cross, the phone wires hum with inquiries and directions. The British Red Cross branch in Hong Kong is one of the busiest and most active in all the overseas territories. It is familiar with calamity in many forms. Fire is one of the great scourges. People live in dense settlements of wooden shacks, doing their cooking by paraffin. A child has only to trip over a flimsy paraffin stove to start a fire which has been known to wipe out a whole settlement and leave 50,000 homeless. Behind Hong Kong's waterfront, the overcrowding has reached appalling dimensions. The squatters, crowded together in shanties and even on the rooftops of buildings, have been swelled by great floods of refugees from the Chinese mainland. More than 1 million have arrived there since World War II. They live here in a squalor against which the worst slums in Europe would look like luxury suburbs. Their shelters are made of scrap tin, salvaged wood and bits of material. There is no sanitation. They are breeding places for diseases such as cholera, which often reach epidemic proportions. The Red Cross plays an inspiring part in their relief. Gradually, the refugees are integrated into the life of the colony. Many of them are trained under government schemes for jobs which can be done in their own homes, mainly handicraft work. Once they are in Hong Kong, they are regarded officially as full members of the community, and the social services are equally available to them. With several millions crowding in a small colony of only 390 square miles, most of it mountain, the population has spilled over onto the sea itself, into sampan villages, where the boats cluster together as densely as any shacks on the land. Here, too, the common denominators are poverty and sickness, though accepted with a gaiety and patience that are moving. To navigate a small sampan among them, loaded with gifts of food and clothing, as these Red Cross youngsters are doing, is a perilous business. No matter how much is done, there's always so much more that could be done, for the need seems limitless. The children even man a Red Cross dispensary boat to bring a regular medical clinic to the water villages. The people who eke out their lives here could never afford themselves the luxury of a doctor. One in 3 of the population of Hong Kong is a refugee. This is the measure of the magnitude of the problem that the government of the colony is tackling with imagination and enterprise. They've spent £11.5 million in the most spectacular building programme ever seen in the East, which has resulted in more than a dozen settlements with blocks of flats like these. Already, 500,000 homeless Chinese have been housed, and plans are going ahead to house a further 500,000 in the next 5 years. To a Red Cross centre in the middle of one of these settlements come the blind children, to classes to learn handiwork, identifying objects by touch, the beginnings of a trade. In these Hong Kong families, everybody works who is able to, down to the tiny tots. There's no braille, so the Red Cross juniors read to them stories, plays, lessons, the newspapers. To be a scholar is the highest aim of the Chinese, and for this, the blind are more sorely handicapped than in the Western world. In Britain, too, the Junior Red Cross cares for the blind as one of a host of voluntary jobs. These young people are learning finger spelling so that they can communicate with the deaf-blind. The system is simple. It can be learned in a morning. Yet it opens up a new dimension for those who can neither hear nor see. To live in a world of utter silence, to be shut off in darkness as well, is surely the loneliest human fate. That a child cares enough to come and touch talk with the simple candour of the young, of the world he sees, brings a very special quality of joy into the life of an old man like this. No health service that has to answer to taxpayers can afford to provide more than the essentials for getting well. Auxiliary nursing, the work of VAD members in hospitals or in the home is perhaps the best known British Red Cross service. In addition, thousands of hospital patients are provided with some of the comforts of home, like this telephone service in a public ward. And there are mobile libraries that, with the Order of St. John, supply 5 million books a year. The shopping trolley's arrival is an event. For patients who have to spend a long time in hospital, staring at the same surroundings, there's even a picture library to brighten it up with a change. For invalids and people who can't manage some of the simplest bodily movements, the Red Cross devise all sorts of aids to make them independent. Tongs to reach and grip. There are suction stickers to stop a nail brush slipping. There are even card stands for those who cannot grip. The great training centre for hundreds of special tasks undertaken by the Red Cross is at Barnett-Hilll in Surrey. Volunteers and field workers from branches and other societies all over the world come here to train. They take courses ranging from first aid and nursing to escorting invalids overseas, courses in handcraft, special welfare, fundraising, VAD work, parent craft, disaster emergency work. Field workers are also trained for the special problems they'll be facing in the crisis centres where they're to be sent. Out in Kenya, living alone in a small cottage on a hilltop, a single field worker from Britain has 2,000 square miles of Kikuyu tribal territory to cover with her relief work. She travels by jeep and works from dawn till after dusk every day of the week. It's a field officer's life. Lonely? Well, no. This takes all of one. She's signed on for a further year. The Kikuyu children are her main concern. They're born fat and jolly, but as soon as they're weaned, they fall victim to every illness that comes with malnutrition, rickets and tuberculosis among them. Many children die before they're 5. Others, abandoned by their mothers, starving, are committed to her legal care for fattening up and placing with a family. Throughout this region, the Red Cross has established feeding and health centres. Whole families are reared solely on beans and maize meal. The children's main need is milk for the protein it gives. When the news that the Red Cross Mama is coming spreads through the neighbouring villages, the mothers trek to the nutrition centres and queue sometimes for days. While these babies were being weighed and examined, a young Kikuyu mother was giving birth to a baby in the room behind. Moments later, she was sitting up and drinking a cup of tea, a luxury for the Kikuyu. Later that afternoon, she got up and walked back home to her own village, far across the hills. The mothers get a handout of powdered milk for their ailing children. Further to the west in Uganda, a whole people has come pouring across the border in flight from Rwanda-Urundi. They are the great tribe of the Watutsi, once the aristocrats and the masters in their own country, now refugees, their power overthrown, dispossessed and helpless. Within days, the Red Cross was on the scene to help the tiny administration, which was battling to settle tens of thousands of homeless tribesmen. They set up aid posts, relief headquarters, sick bays. They radioed for blankets, clothes, food, soap, and recruited volunteers from miles around to help. The children had streaming colds and fever from the rains on the trek. They wouldn't even learn to blow their noses. One Red Cross girl made it her job to tear up piles of rags and spent her spare time chasing flocks of children to wipe their faces and stem the spread of flu and chest troubles. Some refugees brought their cattle with them. A great valley, the Orochinga, it has to be cleared of tsetse fly so they could be moved on to settle there. Every family had to be dosed, some very firmly, with chloroquine against malaria, and the children often double-dosed because they spat it out. The native mothers had even to be taught the virtues of soap and basic hygiene. Slowly, the apathy that afflicts all refugees has left them. They no longer squat about and dream futilely of returning across a now hostile border one day soon. They have settled to make a new life, graze their herds, merge their families into communities, elect their elders, trade. And they have begun to dance. Charity is not just the giving of money or the handing out of benefits. It is true care for one's fellow, which in its very essence is voluntary. Nowhere is it seen more simply than in the care of one youngster for another. Claremont School at Isha, Surrey is one of the many throughout Britain which have opened their doors at vacation time to handicapped children. These crippled youngsters are encouraged to do as much for themselves as they can. The love and care of their parents surrounds them sometimes with almost too much attention, and children like these are excited to learn a measure of usefulness in new surroundings. It's not only a tonic for them to mix so actively with healthy youngsters of their own age, it's also an unthought-of boon to their parents. If only for a fortnight in a year, it lifts from them the daily burden of attending to an invalid child from the moment he wakes to the time he's put to bed again. It's their holiday too, from that, and the relief renews them. For each handicapped child, there is a Red Cross junior who has volunteered as a chum to share every moment with him, at play, work, meals, in the dormitory, and to help him in whatever he cannot do. They give up part of their own holidays for this, And though some of the children are almost entirely helpless, they are there with the strong. In a comradeship, both are learning early in life and getting more from it than can be told. We then that are strong, St. Paul wrote, ought to bear the infirmities of the weak, and not to please ourselves. To this man, that means coming from work, giving up his holidays to give these children theirs. This job brings its own reward. Those children's faces tell their own story. The frailest of all, and among the loneliest, are the very old. The care of them only increases with time because those who are old grow older and more infirm. Most of the nation's aged live in their own homes or with relatives, and Red Cross nursing aid is always available. But a tenth of them would die, helpless and alone, if homes and hostels could not be found for them. In Britain, the Red Cross runs scores of homes for old folk like these, with all the special care and understanding one needs to have for their wants. And the patients, too, for the stubborn among them who resist medical attention, insist on eating the wrong foods, who become more individual and self-willed and easily upset as time goes by. Even the bedridden who still live at home are not forgotten. This old lady is not going to a hospital or to a home. She is 82 and she's going for a joyride. She lives within the sound of the sea, and for 10 years she has lain in her bed longing to see it again. Her grandfather was bosun in Nelson's victory. And there it is, the sea. Those who brought her here are not simply part of something national, for compassion knows no frontiers. Their work stretches across the street, across the nation, across the world.